In the town of Hyde, in Greater Manchester, England, there was a doctor everyone wanted. His waiting list stretched a year long. Patients described him as attentive, warm, generous with his time in a way few doctors ever were. He would sit and talk. He made house calls at the drop of a hat. One patient said getting onto his list felt like winning the lottery. His name was Dr. Harold Shipman, and over 23 years he used the absolute trust his patients placed in him to murder an estimated 250 of them. Most of them elderly people who believed right up until the final moments that they were in the safest possible hands. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in all of recorded history, and what makes his story so uniquely chilling is not how he hid, it's how he didn't have to. This is Dark Diagnosis Files, and this is the documented story of Harold Shipman. As always on this channel, everything you're about to hear is drawn from the public record, Shipman's criminal trial, and the vast official government inquiry that followed his conviction. He was found guilty in a court of law. The inquiry, led by a senior judge, spent years examining the deaths of his patients. These are documented findings, not speculation. Harold Frederick Shipman was born in Nottingham in 1946. As a teenager, he watched his mother die slowly of terminal cancer. In her final months, a doctor would come to the house and administer morphine to ease her suffering. Young Harold reportedly watched, again and again, as the injections calmed her pain, as a physician's needle held the power to soothe and ultimately to preside over the end of a life. Some who have studied his case point to this as a possible origin of the method he would later use to kill. Whether or not that's true, the parallel is impossible to ignore. He studied medicine at Leeds, qualified as a doctor in 1970, and began his career. And here, early on, was the first red flag, one that should have ended his career before it truly began. In the mid-1970s, while working as a young GP, Shipman became addicted to a painkiller called pethidine. He forged prescriptions in patients' names to obtain large quantities of the drug for his own use. He was caught. He was convicted of forgery and prescription fraud, fined, and sent briefly to a drug rehabilitation program. And then, astonishingly, he was allowed to return to practice. He received a warning from the General Medical Council, but he was not struck off. He was permitted to go back to work as a doctor, with full access to controlled drugs and vulnerable patients. In 1977, he joined a practice in Hyde, where the partners were aware of his past drug conviction. He would work in that town, trusted and beloved, for the next 2 decades, killing as he went. A quiet suburban street, rows of modest homes, a doctor's car pulling up outside one of them in the early afternoon. This was the ordinary, unremarkable scene that played out again and again across Shipman's years in Hyde. He made house calls, especially to elderly patients living alone. And with disturbing frequency, those patients were found dead not long after his visit. Often sitting upright in a chair, fully clothed, looking for all the world as though they had simply drifted off. Shipman's method, established through the later investigation, was brutally simple. He would inject his victims with a lethal overdose of diamorphine, the medical name for heroin, a drug he had access to and could obtain, sometimes by overprescribing or collecting it in the names of other patients. Diamorphine in overdose is peaceful and quick. An elderly person would slip away within minutes, and then Shipman, the trusted family doctor, would do the 2 things that let him get away with it for so long. He would sign the death certificate himself, attributing the death to natural causes, old age, heart failure, a stroke, and he would often alter the patient's medical records, backdating false entries to create a documented history of illness. Think about the position that put him in. In the British system of the time, a general practitioner who attended a death could certify its cause. Shipman was the killer, the attending physician, the record keeper, and the certifier, all at once. He controlled the entire narrative of each death. From the injection to the paperwork, to anyone looking casually, an elderly patient with a documented heart condition had died of that heart condition, confirmed by their own caring doctor. There was nothing to question, and he encouraged families toward cremation whenever possible, which would destroy the physical evidence entirely. When a body is cremated, any trace of a diamorphine overdose vanishes forever. There was one more layer to his cover, and it was perhaps the most insidious of all, the sheer depth of his patient's affection for him. When a beloved elderly relative died suddenly, and their trusted doctor, a man the whole family respected, gently explained that it had simply been their time, families believed him. They were grateful to him. Some of the very people whose relatives he had murdered would later describe how kind he had been in the aftermath, how much time he gave them. never suspecting that the man comforting them was the man who had killed. His warmth was not separate from his crimes. It was the camouflage that made them possible. But over the years, quiet unease began to gather at the edges of Shipman's practice. One of the first people to sense something wrong wasn't a doctor at all. It was a local undertaker who began to notice a strange, unsettling pattern in the bodies coming from Shipman's patients. Too many of them, too many elderly women, and a strange consistency in how they were found, frequently dressed, sitting up, as if death had come while they rested. It didn't look like how people usually died. The undertaker raised concerns. A local doctor at a neighboring practice, Linda Reynolds, also grew alarmed. She noticed that Shipman was calling on her practice to countersign an unusually high number of cremation forms. The sheer number of deaths, disproportionate to a practice his size, worried her deeply. In early 1998, she took her concerns to the local coroner, who alerted the police. And here the story nearly took a very different turn. The police did investigate, but they did so quietly, and the officers assigned lacked the experience to properly scrutinize a respected doctor. They found nothing they felt they could act on. They checked Shipman's records, the very records he had falsified, and the records appeared to support natural deaths. The investigation was closed in April 1998 without charges. The later inquiry was scathing about this failure. It found that the investigation had been assigned to an officer without the experience to handle something so serious, and that critical checks were never made. Had the police looked just slightly harder, the pattern was there to be found. The very trust that let Shipman kill also blinded the system meant to stop him. After that failed investigation, Harold Shipman killed at least 3 more people. What finally destroyed him was not the medicine. It was greed, and one death where he broke his own careful pattern. In June 1998, an 81-year-old woman named Kathleen Grundy died suddenly. She was a former mayor of Hyde, active, healthy, and sharp. She had been Shipman's patient, and shortly after her death, a will surfaced, a crude, typewritten document that left almost her entire estate, worth around £400,000, to Harold Shipman himself. But Kathleen Grundy's daughter, Angela Woodruff, was a solicitor, a lawyer, and she knew immediately and with certainty that something was profoundly wrong. Her mother had been meticulous about her affairs. This will was clumsy, the signature looked wrong, and the idea of her mother leaving everything to her doctor was absurd. Woodruff did not let it go. She went to the police. This is one of the great, quiet ironies of the entire case. Harold Shipman had killed, by the inquiry's estimate, around 250 people over more than 2 decades, using a method so clean and a cover so complete that he was almost never questioned. He had, in effect, engineered something close to the perfect method of murder, and then he threw it all away, not for another killing, but for money. The killer who could not be caught by medicine was undone by a clumsy piece of paper. This time, the investigation was thorough. Kathleen Grundy's body had been buried, not cremated, which meant there was something left to examine. Her body was exhumed, and toxicology testing revealed the truth. Lethal levels of morphine, the marker for diamorphine, in her system, consistent with an overdose administered right around the time Shipman had visited her. When police searched Shipman's home and office, they found the instrument of his final undoing, an old typewriter. It was the very machine on which Kathleen Grundy's forged will had been produced. He had, almost carelessly, kept it. They also found medical records that told a story of systematic falsification and a strange collection of patients' jewelry. Once investigators understood what they were looking at, the case expanded with horrifying speed. They began examining other deaths among Shipman's patients. A clear, chilling pattern emerged. An elderly patient, a home visit from Shipman, a sudden death, and falsified records backing it up. Harold Shipman was arrested in September 1998. In January 2000, he was convicted at trial of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. He was sentenced to 15 life sentences with a whole life order. He maintained his innocence throughout and never confessed, never explained. But the 15 murders he was convicted of were only the beginning. The British government established a full public inquiry, the Shipman Inquiry, led by a senior judge, Dame Janet Smith. It examined hundreds of deaths. Its conclusion was almost beyond comprehension. The inquiry found that Harold Shipman had unlawfully killed at least 215 of his patients and was suspected in dozens of further deaths, bringing the likely total to around 250 people. The overwhelming majority were elderly, and most had been in reasonable health. He had not been culling the dying. He had been killing people who had years of life ahead of them. In January 2004, Harold Shipman was found dead in his prison cell, having taken his own life the day before his 58th birthday. He died as he had lived out his final years, silent. His motive was never established. The leading theories, drawn from those who studied him, point to something colder, a need for control, a sense of power over life and death. But no one truly knows. He never told them. What Shipman left behind, beyond immeasurable grief, was reform. The inquiry's findings led to significant changes in how deaths are certified in the United Kingdom, introducing greater independent scrutiny. The way individual doctors' patient death rates are monitored was changed, so that a statistical outlier might now be flagged before hundreds could die. That last point is the quiet tragedy of the whole case. A statistician later showed that Shipman's death rates had been so far outside the norm that, had anyone been watching the numbers, he could have been caught many years and many victims earlier. The data was there the entire time. No one was looking at it. If documented cases like this one stay with you, please take a moment to subscribe to Dark Diagnosis Files. We investigate the real, recorded darkness at the edges of medicine, and the reforms always arriving too late that are paid for in human lives. Your subscription is what keeps this channel going. This is a real case, based on the public court record and the official Shipman Inquiry. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday and Friday. Real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. He was the most trusted man in town for 23 years, and the people who trusted him most are the ones who never knew what he was.